What's up, guys? Welcome to the Two Wheeled Rider YouTube channel. My name is Mario Orsini, back with another motorcycle review. So today I have the brand new 2018 KTM 1290 Super Adventure R, courtesy of the good folks up at Ride On Moto, your authorized KTM dealer in Winchester, Virginia. I'm going to put their information up on the screen, and I'm also going to link it down in the description below. So as I do with all of my motorcycle review videos, we're going to start out with some of the major specs, then we're going to move on. I'm going to show you some of the features and cool things on this bike and how they work. Then we will go out and do the riding portion of the review, and then we'll come back for a final wrap-up. Let's start out with the engine. We have a 1301cc liquid-cooled, fuel-injected V-twin. It does have ride-by-wire. We also have 4 different ride modes, which I'll show later. It's making 160 horsepower, 103 pound-feet of torque. All of that power is going back through a 6-speed transmission equipped with a slipper clutch, quick shifter, which a little bit more on that later, going back to a final X-ring chain drive. Moving up to the front of the bike, let's talk about the front suspension. We've got a WP 48mm upside down front fork that is fully adjustable, albeit not electronically adjustable, that's providing 8.66 inches of suspension travel. Moving back to the back of the bike, we have a WP monoshock, also fully adjustable, also providing 8.66 inches of suspension travel. Moving back up to the front just for a second, it also is equipped with a steering dampener. It is not adjustable. Staying with the front of the bike, let's check out the brakes. We've got Brembo components. We've got twin discs up front, 320mm with 4 piston calipers. On the back of the bike, we have a single disc, which is 267mm with a twin piston caliper. It is equipped with ABS and cornering ABS. Moving back up to the front of the bike, you see we have a 21-inch front wheel. On the back of the bike, we have an 18-inch rear wheel. From the factory, it does come with Continental TKC 80 tires, which are speed rated up to 100 miles per hour. Just a few more quick specs. The bike comes in at a wet weight of 529 pounds. That includes the 6.1 gallons of gasoline that goes into the fuel tank. Because you have 9.8 inches of ground clearance, that means you end up with a seat height a little over 35 inches, and it is a bit of a stretch for me, being 5'10" with a 32-inch inseam. One last thing I want to touch on before I start to show you the features is the maintenance intervals. After your initial 600-mile break-in, you're looking at about 9,300-mile oil changes on the bike, and you're looking at the big service coming in a little over 18,000 miles when you've got to pop the valve covers to check the valve clearance. Now that we've gone over most of the major specs, let's move on so I can show you some of the cool features this bike comes with. All right, so we're going to start up here in the cockpit area, and you may notice there's no keyhole. This is actually a power outlet right here. Over here on the side of the bike, they have a spot for your fob, which is also a key. If you pull on this little strap here, it'll pull it out of here. You could just leave this in your pocket as well. With the fob in proximity, let's start out over here. This is your key button. We're just going to hit that, and we watch this giant TFT display light up. Now, in order to operate this display, we're going to run everything from over here off of these buttons. You also see it has set written on here. And if you look over on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see where it says set. So hit that button and it brings you up your menus. It does have KTM My Ride, which is an app you can download to your phone. So then you can run your navigation, you can run your headset, you can run your phone all through this screen here, take phone calls, all sorts of cool things. Under the info, we have 2 trip odometers. We have general information, which provides you your odometer reading, the date, where the battery is currently setting, and the oil temperature. We also have a tire pressure monitoring system on the bike. It will fire up once the bike fires up and the tires get rolling just a little bit. Under your trips, you have some pretty good information. You obviously have your trip odometer. You have the mileage the bike is currently getting on this tank or since you last reset it. You have your average speed, you have your time, and then you have your fuel range, and it does work really well on this bike, the whole fuel range thing, depending on whether you set it to miles or kilometers. You also see you have your clock down in the bottom corner and what the temperature currently is. And you see it did flip from a white background to a black background. Depending on what the lighting is outside, it'll sense to give you the best readout. You obviously have your tachometer here. You have a big readout on the speedometer. You've got your different ride modes you're in. You've got where your ABS is set. You've got whether your traction control is off or on. You do have some idiot lights down through here. You've got a fuel gauge, you've got your temperature gauge, and then if you look up here in this corner, that is your gear indicator. Now going back over to this menu, if we go into motorcycle, this is where we pick our different ride modes. You have sport, street, rain, and off-road. Rain and off-road are going to cut the horsepower back to 100 horsepower, while sport and street, you're going to get all 160 horsepower. The difference is sport mode is going to have a little bit snappier throttle response than what street mode is. Rain mode and off-road mode are also going to change your traction control settings and your ABS settings. And you can go in and further customize whether or not you want this stuff off or on. Here's your traction control. Here's your ABS. You can set it to road, off-road, or turn it totally off. And this bike also has the hill hold control, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but I've got to use it and it's pretty slick. You also have the option to set some favorites on here. You've got your nav screen info. You can set that up however you want and what things you want available on it. Again, a little bit more on that later. Going back to the KTM My Ride for just a second, it's pretty easy to set up. You just scroll down here to the setup screen and then basically just link it up to your Bluetooth device. So moving back over to the right side of the handlebar, you do have an adjustable brake lever here. You also have an adjustable clutch lever. This is your on-off button for the bike. This is your start button. Just hold down on that, she fires right up. And then you also have your hazard button. Moving back over to this side, these are your controls for your Tft display like I just showed. You have your turn signal indicator down here. It does have auto canceling turn signals on the bike. You have your horn button here. You have your high beam here. You flip it out for high beam, and if you just tap on it, it'll flash. And this is your cruise control. This is a much better setup than what's on my current 2016 Super Adventure. Flip it over to turn it on. Flip it back over if you want to turn it off, but once it's on, that sets it, that resumes it if you happen to kick it off using the clutch or the brakes. And if you want to decrease speed, hold down. You want to increase speed, hold up. This is about as easy as it gets to operate. Staying up here in the cockpit, because we have a good view of our front forks, if you turn the white knob, that is going to adjust your compression. Turn the red knob, that is going to adjust your rebound. And then if you twist down on these bad boys, that is going to adjust your preload. Now, because we have a fob, and that's where our key would normally go, you're probably wondering how you open this. Well, it's fairly simple. It's just proximity related. If the key's within proximity, you can open this thing right up. If it's not, there's no way to open it. Looking up here at the windscreen, it does have a windscreen. It's not a very tall one because this bike is more off-road oriented. Again, a little bit easier to operate than my bike because there's no locking mechanism. It's self-locking. All you do is turn the knob and it will hold itself in place. One last thing up here in the cockpit area, you can fully adjust these handlebars. There are a bunch of different positions you can put these in to get them tuned the way that's most comfortable for you. In addition to being able to adjust the levers and handlebars, you can also adjust your foot pegs. There's a couple different positions that they can be put in. You can adjust your shifter, and then over on the other side, you can even make some adjustments to your rear brake lever. Now, I showed you how the front suspension was adjusted. The rear suspension is fairly easy to adjust too. This knob right here is your preload knob, so click it down for more preload, back it back off for a little less preload. Moving over to the other side of the bike, you do have low speed and high speed compression adjustment by tuning right up here. And then that is a zoom in view of the bottom of the shock, and that's what you're gonna twist in order to adjust your rebound. If you want to use the KTM Power Parts luggage, it is available, and it's the mounting brackets are already integrated on the bike. You will actually retain your factory key to unlock those things because they do come with programmable tumblers if you decide to go with the KTM hardware. Also up here on the top, you do have a back plate, so you could throw a tail pack on here, or if you wanted to go with a hard case like I have on my bike, that's also an option. One thing that kind of stands out to me on this bike, I love the orange frame and I love the orange crash bars. I think those things look pretty trick. And of course, we're missing a skid plate down here on the bottom as usual, but they were nice enough to put a center stand on here, so that makes getting the rear wheel off for tire changes and just adjusting your chain much easier to deal with. And then moving to the front of the bike, we have the split headlight design with an LED headlight in it from the factory. The one thing I didn't mention, you can get this bike, it's an option if you would like heated grips, and you can also get a heated seat for it if you wish. Speaking of seat, let's pop the seat off and see what's underneath it. Now you will need the key in order to get the seat off. Insert that and it pops it right off. There's not a whole lot to see underneath here. I did the canister delete kit on my bike, so I had room to put my toolkit. This bike does come with a pretty decent toolkit. I don't have it with me right now. It's actually up at the shop. There's your plug-in if you need to have any factory diagnostics done. Your battery sitting right underneath here, and you also have a fuse block back here. All right, so let me show you how to set up this KTM My Ride. So I'm going to go into my phone. I see I am connected to the LC8 dashboard. You can go into your KTM app right here and you can see it's connected. So the one thing we haven't done, or at least I haven't done yet, is set up my Bluetooth headset. So I'm going to do that next. And I'm going to go headset rider, pairing. And then it just depends on your device, but once you set it to pairing mode, it pops right up there on your screen. Hit the set button and our connection's successful. So while we're out on the bike, I'll show you how this bad boy works. All right, I wanted to show you guys a few more things about the KTM My Ride app now that I've had a chance to play around with it a little bit more. Figured we'd do a little nighttime riding so you can see what the headlight looks like too. You can see I have navigation on here right now. To show you how to do that, we're going to cut back to my office for a minute so I can show you how to hook up your phone and a couple of different little setting changes to make depending on where you live and the options you have. And then we'll cut back to here and I'll explain the way I have it set up here for riding in the US. Alright, so when it comes to the KTM My Ride app, you need to go into the app. Alright, let me show you a few settings. So you actually want to go into settings _ settings label text. And here is where I live in the United States, so I'm going to choose US text. You also have metric, and for the UK, you've got their measurements on there. For voice, there are a lot of different options for different countries, different voices. For English, we have UK and US. I have mine set for US. You can also choose the different maps you want to use. You've got North and Central America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. And once you have that set, you have some other options on here too if you want the map label, if you want the satellite, how you want it to show up on your phone. There are a lot of different ways to configure this. Now if you want to enter some sort of location that you'd like to go to, we're going to use 4110 Valley Pike because that's Ride On Moto. You're going to have to do this before you take off on the bike, and you can go ahead and hit that little button right there. And now when we connect this back to the display, to our headset and everything, it's going to give us turn-by-turn directions on how to get there. All right, so with our settings in place, we're going to kick back over to show you how it works on the bike. All right, so now that we're back and you've seen how to set up the app, I would say one of the downsides is, if you're going to use navigation, is there's no way to do voiceover commands, at least that I've been able to figure out. Being that it's an app, some of the shortcomings I'm going to point out could easily be updated with software updates, so I'm not overly concerned with it, and it's just a minor point anyway. So anyway, once you program in your address, you're going to get turn-by-turn directions here on your screen. You can see it's going to tell you where the next turn is, which in my case, I'm just going to kind of bear off to the left up here in about 5 miles. It's going to give you the road name, it's going to give you your arrival time, and it's also going to show you the amount of distance you have left until your arrival. What's cool about this is once you have it set up the way you want in the app, you can choose whether or not you want voiceover commands. In my case, I have it set up to the US or the English voice and in a US accent. So she won't only tell you how much further you have, she'll tell you the name of the road coming up, get ready to make the turn, that sort of thing. Much like, you know, the Apple Maps app that I'm used to using, or the Google Maps app that I have available on my phone. It works pretty much in the same way, but it's available here on your TFT display. Now, one thing to remember is the navigation is not built into the TFT display, meaning it is running off of an app, it is running off of your smartphone. And I believe right now it's only available on iPhone, though I believe they are going to make it available on Android in the near future. Now, what else is neat about this app is while you're working your navigation, if you want, you can come back into KTM My Ride, go over to your audio. You can see I've got, it's pretty funny, I've got Jack Daniels by Eric Church playing right now. I have it turned down so it doesn't pick up in the speakers. And you can adjust your audio or change your song right here with the controls on the handlebars. So if I want to skip ahead to the next song, I tap the top button. If I want to go back a song, I tap the bottom button. If I want to turn the volume up, I hold down on the top button, volume down, hold down on the bottom button. And if I want to pause it or play it, same sort of deal, I'm just tapping the set button. So it is pretty cool that you can operate your audio controls through the handlebar, through the TFT display, all going through your headset and your phone, all through the app. If you want to use the built-in navigation, you can. You can also take phone calls, and it's going to pop up on the display who's calling you. I took a call the other night. My dad's name popped up. it flashed in like red or something, and it actually shows you the controls to answer it, which I believe was just the set button. You still had volume control up down while you were on the phone if you needed to adjust that, and then to hang up the call, I believe it was the set button again. The only thing I haven't figured out on phone calls is how to actually make a phone call, because if you're running it through the app and through the TFT display, I don't believe there's a way to do that yet, but like I said, with a software update, I don't see that being a problem. Now, if you do want to be able to use your voiceover commands through Siri or whatever your onboard assistant is, right now you're not going to be able to go through the KTM My Ride app if you want full voice command. So that's something to be aware of. But I think it is a pretty cool feature in here, and like I said, I think its capabilities will only get better. It does work flawlessly once you have the device paired to both your head, or once you have your phone paired to the TFT display and your headset paired. I mean, as soon as you turn everything on, it automatically syncs, and I haven't had any sort of issues or bugginess out of it. So overall, I think it's a kind of a cool feature to have, and I do like the fact that it's built into an app. So if you are going to do software updates, they can just push those out, and this isn't something where you're going to have to take the TFT display and the bike back to the dealer to have them updated. So now that I've had the opportunity to ride this bike over 250 miles, because it's been a lot of fun, which may spoil what I'm about to say, let me give you some thoughts. First off, when it comes to the engine, the power plant on this thing, you guys already know I love this engine. I mean, it's the same engine that's sitting in my bike. There's a reason I spent my own money on a Super Adventure a year and a half, 2 years ago, because I love the engine. The engine's great. However, this thing has something that mine doesn't have that I really, really like, and that has to do with the transmission. It has essentially the same powertrain as what my bike has. However, the big difference is, while mine has a slipper clutch, so does this one. This one has the quick shifter. Let me show you how this thing works. I can stay right on the throttle. I'm going to short shift a little bit. Obviously my hand is off right now, and I never had to let off. And at first, and then you can also downshift with it too. It's not just upshift, it's upshift or downshift, and it will rev match for you. You don't have to do a damn thing. And as much as I like it, it also irritates me because someone with little to no experience riding, or just very basic riding knowledge, is going to be able to ride this bike pretty well because of all the electronic aids on it. So speaking of electronics, this bike is equipped with ABS, cornering ABS, traction control, and hill hold control. And then obviously, you know, I just talked about the shifter on it. I'll talk about the hill hold control here in just a minute, but let me talk about the traction control. This is not a very intrusive traction control system on this bike, depending on what ride mode you have it in. Now, I had it off-road earlier, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And I had traction control, and it will kick on in off-road mode, but again, it's not intrusive. You can still ride the bike hard and have fun with it without the computer saying, hey, slow it down, knucklehead. You know, the ABS and cornering ABS are great safety features. I don't really notice them kicking on too often, but they are there to save your bacon if you need it. You know, I mentioned the hill hold control. I shot a short clip earlier to show you how that works. Let's jump over to it, and then we'll jump back to on the bike. All right, I'm going to show you guys how this hill assist works. You can probably see down there on the dash, the traction control is flashing. With the front brake or the rear brake applied, once I let off, it's not going to let me coast back. The bike is actually going to keep the brakes applied until I take off. For those of you that are a little bit shorter or maybe a little bit smaller of stature and are worried about, you know, being able to get your feet down at a stoplight or on an incline or something, this should ease your mind a little bit. It is there, you see it flashing again. It is pretty damn cool how it works. So anyway, that is the hill control, or hill hold control. We're gonna try something else out here with the hill hold to see. So I cannot get it to engage when it's in neutral. So the bike has to be in gear for the hill hold control to work, which tells me it's probably running off the clutch engagement as opposed to the brakes. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I just wanted to do that little test right there. So let's hop off the electronics for a second and talk about the suspension, because it's not actually electronically controlled, though it is fully adjustable. It's very easy to get tuned in. You know, start with your factory settings and then tune it from there. But the suspension's super compliant. I have it set in the same thing riding on-road as I did riding off-road, and it did a both job in both instances. You know, having the big preload knob on the back, that way if you're going to put a passenger on, and I'll talk a little bit about that later,
to be able to adjust the preload and get it set so you keep the right sag height. Pretty easy to do. You do need tools to work on some of this stuff. Some of the stuff can be done by hand. Some of it you just need a screwdriver or a wrench and a couple minutes at a time. I did mention ABS and cornering ABS, but I didn't really talk about the brakes themselves. And it's probably because it's the same brake setup I have on my Super Adventure, and to me it's one of the best brake setups available on a street bike right now. They've got a really linear feel to them, and they'll slow you down. I mean, I don't know what else to say about them. They're awesome brakes. They'll give you great feedback, and you should never have to worry about slowing down for a corner or for a stop. When it comes to ergos, they're exactly the same as they are on my Super Adventure. I don't notice a bit of difference other than maybe the tank's just a little bit narrower. And while the seat is different, mine has a two-piece seat versus this single-piece seat unit. I don't notice any difference sitting on it. It feels exactly the same. Now, when we talk to Kristen here in just a little bit to get her impressions, hers may be different, but for me, ergos are exactly the same as my Super Adventure, which is to say, comfortable as can be. Now, I did mention the suspension earlier, and it works really well, but let me talk a little bit more detail about the handling, because on my bike, I have a 19-inch front. This one has a 21-inch front. I expected it to be much slower turning it in. It is a little slower, but it's not anything really noticeable. I mean, it's ever so minute, and I wonder if part of it has to do with the fact that mine has an 8-gallon tank, and this one is just a smidge over 6 gallons, and that's an extra, 16 pounds of weight up top on my bike that this one doesn't have, maybe making it negate the little bit slower turn in because we got a little less mass to move up here. I'm not entirely sure. That's just my guess. Once I ride one of the Super Adventure S's, we'll see if that's correct. But anyway, back on it, the handling's really, really good. It turns in quick enough. I mean, it's an adventure bike. It's not a sport bike. And then the other thing about it is the TKC 80 tires, they were really good in gravel and dirt, and they're a great off-road tire. They're a much better on-road tire than I could ever expected them to be. I mean, they're awesome. The only thing is, and this is just something you need to be aware of, and this goes for any knobby tire, if you get to slightly more extreme lean angles, you're gonna feel the bike just move a little bit underneath of you, and that's just because that's the way the tire's made, and it's not going to be quite as planted. It's not dangerous, it's just something you need to be aware of, and if you don't like that feeling, just slow it down in the corners a little bit, or put something on like a TKC 70 that's a little more street oriented.
Hey guys, so I'm back to give you a quick and short, sweet review of the 1290 Super Adventure R. As you may know, we have the KTM 1290 Super Adventure, so the ergonomics are set up pretty much the same, so I'm fairly comfortable on that. Can do a lot of long mileage days. I did like the black and the orange paint scheme. I thought that was pretty cool, but the one feature that sets it apart is the quick shifter, which was awesome. It has a really smooth feel to it. If you have any reservation of sort of smacking the back of your rider's helmet in front of you, this will alleviate 90% of that fear. Overall, I thought it was 2 thumbs up, had a great time on it, a lot of fun, great bike.
All right, so now that I've kind of given you my overall impressions of the bike, which I'm sure didn't surprise anyone because it's not a whole lot different than my motorcycle when it comes to the setup of the chassis and the engine and the drivetrain and suspension and stuff like that. But there are some differences, and one of them staring me right in the face, and that's the Tft Display. This is one of the easiest read Tft displays I've come in contact with. It's a huge screen. I love how we have all this information over here on the right, which is all essential stuff, all the way down to the fuel gauge, and it's easy to read quickly, and that's a very important thing for me, and it should be a very important thing for anyone that's riding on a motorcycle, because you want to be able to keep your eyes on the road as much as possible. So just be able to glance down and get the information you need is essential. I love that over here on the left hand side, I don't want to say it's fully customizable, but there are a lot of different things I can pull up on there. It's easy to navigate through the menus if you want to change your ride mode. It's easy to get information depending on what it is that you want from your trip odometers, or if you want to, there are certain things you can't adjust. You can't adjust your ABS or turn the hill hold control off or on, but you can adjust your traction control, you can adjust your ride mode. On your info, you can check your tires on the fly. Like, there's a lot of information you can get over here, and it's all run with your left thumb, and it's easy as can be. Something else I really like about this bike over mine is the cruise control. Now, mine has cruise control, but mine is kind of blocky and it's over here on the right, meaning you got to hold on to the throttle as you're adjusting it or as you're setting the cruise. And then the other part about that is it's a 2-button setup. There's an on-off button, and then there's the button that you use for setting the cruise, resuming the cruise, accelerating, decelerating. This one is over here on the left-hand side, which is much easier to operate because I've got this hand free, and it's a single button setup. Flip it to the left to turn it on, flip it down, and it's on, and it works really, really well, and I like this setup. Obviously, earlier I already touched on the fact that we have the, so we'll just downshift right there. Obviously, my hand was off the clutch the whole time. I love the fact that we have the quick shifter on this thing. That is something that I'd really like to have on my bike, and I'm going to have to check in how I can make that happen. Another thing I like about this model, I like this, I'm not saying I like this windshield. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I like this windshield setup. It's not as easy to operate as the Ducati Multis are with the little push thing in that slides up, but it is much easier than mine because now it's a single hand operation. You know, it works. So I do have 2 minor nitpicks. These aren't big problems that I have with the bike. One of them actually has to do with the Tft Display, which I just said I really like. If you're riding this bike when the sun's going down, or early in the morning, or maybe even on a really cloudy day, to me it's a little trigger happy. And what I mean by that is, right now this is the daytime setup. The nighttime setup is a black background, and it wants to flip too quickly. Now, if we were to just flip to white or black, you know, the opposite of whichever one's on, and stay there for a while, it'd be okay. But while I was riding it at kind of dusk the other night, and I'd get to some areas that weren't in the trees or whatever, and lighten back up a little, within about 3 or 4 miles, that thing probably flipped a dozen times on me. I know that's just a minor annoyance, but, you know, it's just something I wanted to point out. And honestly, it doesn't really matter if it's a black background or a white background. You can read both of them just fine in the broad daylight or at night. So I didn't talk much about the windshield. I just kind of glanced over it. It does work fairly well. It's not meant to be as tall as it is on my bike and punch a big hole into the wind, but it punches a big enough hole. Out on the interstate is the only place where I really noticed I was getting a lot more wind than what I'm used to. Obviously, I'm sure there's one you could bolt on there if you want a taller one, but it does a pretty good job. So one other little issue I had with the bike, if you're riding in jeans or shorts, or you're not wearing riding pants, and if you don't know what riding pants are, get yourself a pair because you'll be a lot safer out on the road. You are going to feel a little bit of heat off this engine, especially over on your left leg. At least I did. I kind of tested under all conditions. I went through town, I've done interstate, I've done back roads, I've done a little bit of everything. And as long as you're moving, the heat's not really an issue. But if you're sitting still or you're going slow through town, you are going to start to notice some heat on that left leg and a little bit on the right leg. But again, if you put a pair of riding pants on, it becomes a non-issue. Now, because I know the questions are going to pop up in the comment section, because they've already popped up on Instagram and Facebook, people want to know, how do I think this bike would compare as a touring bike to my bike, which is a Super Adventure T or Super Adventure, whatever you want to call it. And for the most part, I think this thing would be just as tour worthy as my bike, with a couple of caveats. But let me start with the good stuff. First off, if you already have one of the T models or another Super Adventure model, and you have the hard bags from KTM, they all bolt right onto this thing. You can use all the same bags, just rekey them to your new key, and you've already got all your luggage and you're ready to go from that standpoint. And again, you have a center stand, so it makes it a little bit easier to maintain the chain while you're out on big long rides if you got to make any adjustments. One spot where it falls a little short would be the windshield, but again, that is an easy bolt-on item, no big deal there. I had first thought the tank, the fuel tank size would pose a bit of a problem because it's 6.1 versus 7.9, but you can still go 250, 260 miles on a tank of fuel on this bike, which should be more than enough for just about any place you want to go, and not have to worry about running out of fuel. I think the only other negative I could see when you're comparing this to the T model when it comes to touring is you're going to have a few less tire choices that are roadworthy for a 21-inch front wheel than you are a 19-inch front wheel. There's just more options available, but I'm sure there's plenty of stuff available for this. Because these TKC 80s, if you wanted to go do big touring on this, they're just not going to last. I think, you know, you're probably going to get around 3,500, maybe 4,000 out of a rear tire if you're riding it mostly on the road when it comes to this compound. So you definitely want something that's a little bit more roadworthy. That way you can actually go some distance without having to replace tires midway through the trip. Now, the only other thing is if you're going to be doing two-up touring, I could see where the T model is a little bit superior to the R model, and that's because the T model has the automatic preload adjustments for the electronic suspension, meaning you don't have to mess with anything here. So that's just it's a convenience thing. There's nothing wrong with the suspension on this bike. You're just going to have to set it before you throw all your bags and your passenger on the back, whereas opposed to the T model, you just hit a button and it adjusts it for you. So let me talk about the little bit of off-roading I did. It was nothing extreme. It was just some fire roads that some of them were dirt, some of them were gravel. Nothing difficult, but I just kind of wanted to test out these tires, test out the bike, see how the traction control and stuff worked on it. I did take the 1190 Adventure R out on some decent trails in the past, over at my buddy's farm and up the side of the mountain. So I kind of already know how the bike's going to handle off-road, but it's crazy how well it does off-road for a 500+ pound motorcycle, and it doesn't really show its weight. Now, one thing I would add before riding it off-road is I go ahead and pull the rubber inserts out. That way you can make sure the teeth from the foot peg give you a nice tight grip on your boot. But the bike does really, really well off-road, especially for a bike this size. The only time I've ever seen one of these things really show their weight is, you know, the one time when I was out on the 1190 and we came to some big down logs that there was no way I was going to get over, and we had to turn it around in the middle of single track, and it took two of us. That's when you know the thing weighs 500+ pounds. But as long as you can keep it upright and riding, it's really amazing how well it is when you get off the beaten path. All right, guys, so just to wrap up my thoughts on the 2018 KTM 1290 Super Adventure R, it's an amazing machine. Try as I may, I couldn't find a whole lot wrong with it other than a few ticky-tacky things. But if you're looking for an adventure bike, this one should probably be on the top of your list because it's going to do very, very well off-road. But if you wanted to turn it into more of a touring bike, it'd be easy to do with a set of hard luggage and just a few little tweaks to it. So we're going to head back to the garage where we're going to wrap up, but I already shot that video earlier, so I'm actually going to go ride for a while, and you guys are headed back to the garage.
All right, guys, so those are my thoughts on the 2018 KTM 1290 Super Adventure. But you don't have to take my word for it, so I suggest you go ride one yourself. In fact, if you'd like to ride this exact bike, this is a demo model that will be available up at Ride On Moto in Winchester, Virginia. Once again, big thank you to those guys for loaning me this bike out. It was a ton of fun. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's review video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button, because if you like motorcycles, this is the place to be. If you've got any additional questions, maybe something I glossed over, maybe something you just like a little bit more information on, let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, I'll talk to you again soon.